Hello and happy Friday. Welcome to the Millvale Studios for this week's edition of Gajtka Game on the River's Edge. Brought to you on riversedgepgh.com, our 24/7 streaming website. The River's Edge is a new kind of radio, and I like to call Gajtka Game a new kind of sports talk. I'm your host, Matt Gajtka, and for the next hour, I'll take you on a journey of intellectual exploration. That sounds exciting. Well, at least it does to me. Hope it does to you as well. We're going to do all the usual things that we do on this 60-minute tour. We will ban a cliche. I'll deliver the final number, which is always something that contains much suspense over the course of the show. And I'll welcome in, as always, an expert witness, my good friend and colleague at DKPittsburghSports.com, Matt Welch, will join me from Morgantown, West Virginia. So we'll go south of the border, if you will, here on this edition of Gajtka Game. Also, plenty of hockey talk, some football, although in a different way than we've been discussing it in recent weeks. A very sobering subject, in fact, related to the NFL just coming up on Thursday that I'd like to get to later in the program. But before we get to all that, in tonight's opening statement, I want to do something that we don't usually do on this show, which is a very news-heavy opening few minutes. And I don't usually do this because I like to talk a lot of big-picture topics on this program, and also some of the details, too, especially when it comes to the guests that we have on the program. But what occurred Thursday morning before the Penguins hosted the San Jose Sharks in a Stanley Cup rematch at PPG Paints Arena, I think merits further exploration because it does have big-picture implications. And that, of course, if you are a Penguins fan, you probably already know what I'm talking about, but it was the signing of goaltender Matt Murray to a 3-year extension that'll kick in for the 2017-18 season. And it's worth $11.25 million, as reported by my colleague Josh Yohe at DKPittsburghSports.com, among others. And Josh had the opportunity to speak to Penguins GM Jim Rutherford about this deal and what exactly it might mean for not just Matt Murray, but also the Penguins as a team and Marc-Andre Fleury in particular, who has been thrust right back into his familiar number one role at the start of this season, with Matt Murray recovering from a broken hand or a broken thumb that he sustained at the World Cup of Hockey last month. It has been Fleury's net, even in a back-to-back situation, surprisingly, earlier this week. He played twice in 24 or so hours, 27 hours we'll call it, against the Avalanche at home and Montreal on the road, even with an NHL experience backup and Mike Condon signed. Mike Sullivan and the Penguins going to Marc-Andre extremely often as is possible in the early going, with Matt Murray recovering from an injury. But Murray will be healthy soon enough, and then we will see the start of what will surely be a very interesting, maybe the most interesting storyline for the defending Cup champs. Who gets the net? Who ends up with the net by the end of the year? And I think there are many Penguins fans out there, I know there are many Penguins fans out there who believe that one of these goalies will be gone by the end of the season. There will be some team in the NHL that wants to pick up either a proven veteran in Fleury, a Cup champion back in 2009, a two-time Stanley Cup finalist, but also an elite goalie by any measure over the past 3 seasons, and now into 4 under goaltending coach Mike Bales, who refined Fleury's technique and allowed him to parlay that signature athleticism into a more consistent style of goaltending. And it's been pretty much all good for Marc-Andre, or at least it was until last spring when a concussion suffered late in the season put him on the bench and put Murray in the starting 6 each and every night as the Penguins pushed for their 4th Stanley Cup. Murray played fairly well early on in the postseason, then kind of so-so, but by the time the Pens got to the 3rd and 4th round of the Stanley Cup playoffs, they were playing so well as a team. I don't want to say it didn't matter who was in goal, but there were quite a few squeaky ones that got through Matt Murray, who was just 22 at the time. But it didn't matter because, as I mentioned, the Penguins were playing so well. But Murray was still under an entry-level deal. He still had another year to go. In fact, before he'd even become a restricted free agent, which isn't true free agency. Under restricted free agency, another team can offer you a contract, but the team that had drafted you, the team that brought you up, could always match that to keep you with their team. So there wasn't anything terribly imminent about signing Matt Murray or the need to do so for Jim Rutherford, the Penguins GM, but he did on Thursday afternoon. And as I mentioned, 3 years, $11.25 million, right around the same type of contract that Matt Murray's peers have gotten, including Pittsburgh's own John Gibson, who plays out in Anaheim and has had kind of an up and down first couple of years in the NHL, some playoff success, and also some struggles. Murray hasn't played long enough to even have any struggles in the regular season, at least. I believe coming into the year, he had 12 or 13 NHL games to his credit, and all of those were at the end of last season. But Jim Rutherford told Josh Yohe Thursday that just because Murray was signed doesn't mean that necessarily he plans on trading either Murray or Marc-Andre Fleury. I mentioned Marc-Andre's benefits to a team that would need a goalie, maybe later this season, maybe in the offseason. But also Matt Murray, a young, promising goaltender who's already won a Stanley Cup and who's signed for relatively cheap. 3 years, $11.25 million. That's not even $4 million a year if we do the back of the envelope math. But what Rutherford told Josh Thursday morning was, first of all, I'll read the whole quote to you. In fact, I think this might be the most effective way to give you the gist of it. Rutherford said, let's just back up a little bit at first. So Jim pushing back against the perception that Fleury might be gone automatically because of this signing of Murray. Rutherford continued, the focus seems to be on what happens with Marc-Andre. Okay, let's let this play itself out. Let's not just presume that Marc is automatically out. He's been the franchise goalie here. He's a terrific person. He's a terrific player. I think with that assumption that he'll be traded, we're getting ahead of ourselves. And I agree with that. And Rutherford finished by saying, let's let the two guys play it out, and we'll see how it goes. If it happens to be a decision on Marc-Andre, there are several options of dealing with that as far as the expansion draft goes. And yes, there is another contingency. Las Vegas will be awarded the NHL's 31st franchise this upcoming summer. Well, the franchise has already been awarded, but it will really get going in terms of player personnel this upcoming summer when the expansion draft occurs. Marc-Andre Fleury has a no-movement clause in his contract, which covers the next 2 seasons after this one at $5.75 million per year. And again, more from Rutherford. He said, we started talking about the Murray extension during training camp, not something they felt we had to have done within a week. They knew they'd have to go through the process. So that's right from the general manager's mouth. And I would probably agree with some of you out there who are saying, well, of course he's going to play up the fact that he could keep both goalies even into next year. There could be a way to do that. You could protect Matt Murray, and of course Marc-Andre has that no movement clause that he would have to waive in order to be part of the expansion draft. So plenty of contingencies up ahead, but I'm not sure this contract today, signed Thursday, changed anything necessarily because, as I mentioned, both goalies would be worth, I think, quite a bit on the trade market. And Jim Rutherford, a former goalie, has reason to keep both of these goalies under control this year. The Penguins, again, like I mentioned last year, they're trying to win the Cup again this year. So having 2 quality netminders would help you, clearly, in that endeavor. And even though going into next season, the Penguins will have committed almost $10 million combined to the goaltending position, and only one team in the NHL has committed more than that, and that's the Dallas Stars with Antti Niemi and Kari Lehtonen, 2 Finnish goalies, and both of them have somewhat disappointed. Perhaps that's the only thing that's holding Dallas back from being a true Stanley Cup contender is its goaltending. But they're one of many teams that could perhaps come knocking on Jim Rutherford's door. The LA Kings are too, with Jonathan Quick out multiple months with a lower body injury, a groin injury that he suffered in the early going of this season. So there's so many possibilities that are still out there, and that's what I want to remind Penguins fans, that this Murray contract doesn't really mean anything. And I would argue almost that Matt Murray would get you more on the open market because, again, he's not, or on the trade market, not the open market. Of course, he's locked in, but Murray, still just 22 years old, has his early success in the NHL and also signed for less than $4 million per year. So in a cap league, the salary, the average annual value, the AAV, if you see that, that's what that means in an article. That is almost as important as the quality of the player. I say almost because you don't want to sign a bad player to a cheap contract, but that cap space is absolutely critical. And the Penguins will still have a good amount of that this year, or enough of that, because this deal doesn't kick in for Murray until next season. So despite the newsworthiness of this headline this morning that Matt Murray was re-signed, that I don't think any reporter in town or elsewhere had negotiations going on. No one had that story. So this was a surprise, I think, in some ways. And, for me, I was clearly taken aback by it. I didn't think the Penguins would try to sign Murray, but there's also another, or sign Murray this early, but there's also another benefit to signing him, and that is that you set his value exactly if you are pushing him in a trade, or if trade talks do come up. So there is a benefit to the team that picks him up, because you don't have to worry about locking him into a longer-term deal, because the Penguins already did that for you. So that's all the business side of it, and of course that appeals to many, and it's very important for Rutherford and the Penguins, as I mentioned, in a cap league, to keep things under control and not devote too much cash to one position or another. But having two goalies certainly appeals to Rutherford, to competent Stanley Cup level goalies, partially because of what he experienced last year when Fleury got hurt and Murray was able to step in, but partially because of what he experienced a decade ago in Carolina when Cam Ward won the Stanley Cup in a very similar position, or helped the Hurricanes win the Stanley Cup. He didn't win it on his own, but you know what I mean. And he was in a very similar position, Cam Ward was, to Matt Murray, very young and inexperienced in the NHL, particularly as it pertains to the regular season. And the Hurricanes signed him to a long-term contract, and he turned out to be, over the course of the last decade, a very average goalie. So the one thing that Fleury has on his side, besides being locked in for 2 more years after this one, is that he has the track record, and he has, especially the last 3 years of elite-level goaltending. He is a known quantity, is what I'm saying. Even at 31, I think we can reasonably expect until about age 34 or 35 that he's going to be able to maintain some semblance of the level that he's found since the start of the 2013-14 season. So I don't see this news Thursday as tilting the balance one way or the other. I think we're still in the same spot, which is to say practically a stalemate as we await to see how the rest of the season plays out and which goalie gets more than net. Fleury already has a head start with the injury, but I expect that to start to balance out as we head closer to Christmas time and the midway point of the season. Still a long way to go, but this is our first real flashpoint in the goaltending controversy, and one that I admit I didn't see coming, at least this early in the season. You're listening to Gajtka Game. We'll step out for a moment and bring in our expert witness of the week, Matt Welch of DKPittsburghSports.com, to talk some West Virginia Mountaineers. That's right, the most impressive regional college football team this fall has been the 12th-ranked Mountaineers, and they host TCU in a Big 12 clash Saturday afternoon. I'll talk to Matt about that and also dig a little bit deeper. We'll go inside the actor's studio, if you will, with Matt Welch, with some of his influences and how he got into the business. That's coming up next on The River's Edge.
Hi, I'm Mike Storer, host of the Awesome Cast, which you can hear right here on River's Edge Radio. We're talking tech, getting geeky every week with people from Pittsburgh in the industry. Go check us out, awesomecast.net, or listen to us right here on River's Edge Radio, Thursday mornings, 8 a.m. after Funny Money.
Welcome back to Gajtka Game on the River's Edge for this October 21st, 2016. And we are deep into college football season, and particularly relevant south of the border in Morgantown, West Virginia, where the number 12 ranked Mountaineers host TCU on Saturday afternoon at Milan Puskar Stadium. And the man that's on the line right now, on our guest line here on the River's Edge, covers the Mountaineers for DKPittsburghSports.com. He is my colleague there, and his name is Matt Welch. Matt, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. And how are things on a beautiful fall week down in Morgantown.
Yeah, it's always fun when the leaves start changing around Morgantown, scenery-wise, things like that. The stadium's actually in a good spot for a lot of that to see. So the fans like to take that kind of stuff in, things like that. So the fall time is good, but it's even better for Mountaineer fans to see their team ranked inside the top 15.
It has been a little while for the Mountaineers getting off to such a nice start. And looking back at last week, Matt, that seemed to be the most impressive performance of the year for a lot of people defensively, especially shutting down a Texas Tech team that had put up the points and the yards. And that, at least for me, from the outside, has appeared to put them more in the national conversation. Do you have the same feel down there this week as the Mountaineers prepare for another conference matchup?
Yeah, I think so too. I was telling someone earlier, actually today, that a defensive performance against Texas Tech is probably one of the best I've seen since I've followed the Mountaineers, probably since my high school days back in the 2000s. So to see them go out and play like that against that kind of team, allowing 17 points to them is almost like a shutout. So by far, I think probably the best performance West Virginia defense has had in the Big 12. Just completely, once they figured it out how to get pressure on Patrick Mahomes, the Texas Tech quarterback, they just came right at him. He was still able to frustrate Tony Gibson a little bit, the defensive coordinator for West Virginia, and he was just sending guys at him. He told us on Tuesday that he was just tired of seeing Mahomes run around, so he would just send a guy after him to try to limit that. So just because it looked good doesn't mean it wasn't frustrating for the guys involved. It was definitely earned, that performance was. But same kind of thing coming in this weekend. Texas Tech has a quarterback who likes to run. But at the same time, when he scrambles, he's not really looking to run. I mean, he's scrambling around to try to extend plays in the passing game. He wants his receivers to get open. They run a lot of scramble drills, things like that. But so does West Virginia. So, I mean, this defense has worked on that a lot in practice, just going up against their own guys. So it should be fun on Saturday.
You mentioned Tony Gibson, the defensive coordinator. When many folks outside of Morgantown or in Morgantown and in Mountaineer Nation, if you will, think about the football program, they think about the head coach, Dana Holgerson, and that air raid reputation that he brought to town. But Tony Gibson's unit making some serious waves here this year. What type of a defense does he like to run? What's his philosophy for those who may be tuning into a Mountaineer game for the first time this weekend?
Yeah, he runs the old 3-3-5 that West Virginia ran back in the day in the old Big East. He was actually, I believe, he was the safeties coach for those teams under Rich Rodriguez before he left. So he knows what the 3-3-5 is all about. It's a lot of athletes on the field. It's kind of geared to stop the run, but somehow Gibby's kind of made it able to stop the pass too. And when I say stop the pass, I mean kind of hold teams to about 250 to 350 yards. That's what a good stopping the pass in the Big 12 is nowadays. But he's found a way to limit teams on third down, which is huge, and he's found ways to keep teams out of the end zone. Their red zone defense is probably one of the best in the Big 12. Maybe not numbers wise, but I mean, when you look at the product on the field, teams struggle against West Virginia in the red zone and on third down too. This year's defense isn't as strong on third down as it has been, but at the same time, I mean, these guys are getting used to what's going on. They've had a few years in the system now, so they're definitely starting to figure it out. But one of the biggest things for Gibby's defense is the fact that he can bring whoever he wants on a blitz, and he's not afraid to blitz anybody. He'll blitz a corner, he'll blitz safety, he'll blitz linebackers, he'll blitz whoever he wants, and you never know where it's going to come from. So that is unique with what he runs there.
It's amazing how much standards have changed in defensive football since I first started watching the sport 2 decades ago, and particularly in college football, and especially in the Big 12. So, like you said, what he did last week, what the unit did last week in holding Texas Tech to 17 points, winning 48-17 on the road. Very quality result there. You're listening to Gajtka Game on the River's Edge. Matt Welch is my guest. You can find him on Twitter at Matt Welch, WELCH _PGH, and he is our West Virginia University beat reporter at dkpittsburghsports.com. And Matt, when you again, when you think about the Mountaineers, you think about Dana Holgorsen, and there was some talk in the offseason that perhaps his job was in jeopardy, and there was that whole situation where the plane landed at the airport in Morgantown with an LSU logo on it. I'm guessing that things have settled down in that area with the 5-0 start.
Yeah, the athletic director, Shane Lyons, has already told us before the season started that he's not going to discuss any kind of contract negotiations during the season with any of us. So you're probably not going to hear anything about that until after the season as far as numbers go and if he's going to stay, if he's gone, things like that. But I've been a big proponent since the preseason that he's not going to go anywhere, even if he would have had another subpar year this year. I think Shane Lyons is going to give him an extra year with Will Grier, the Florida quarterback who transferred in this offseason, just to see what he can do with him. That's been the biggest knock on Holgorsen since he came, is that he's never developed a quarterback. That was what he was supposed to do when he came in. I mean, he had guys like Case Keenum and those kind of guys when he was at Houston and Oklahoma State and even Texas Tech. I mean, he coached Cliff Kingsbury, who's the one who's running that offense now for Texas Tech as the head coach. So that was his biggest knock on him, is that he's not been able to develop a quarterback. And as soon as Will Grier decided to come to West Virginia, that kind of went away, even though he hasn't even been on the field yet. Everyone is already looking forward to what he's going to be able to do in the offense for the next 2 years. So I was never a big hot seat guy for Holgorsen as far as this year goes, but with the 5-0 start, people are starting to now be on his side instead of be against him. So it's funny how things change when you start winning football games.
Yeah, and in the world of football, it can all change very drastically from week to week. And West Virginia, maybe some of the players, a handful of players, are still left from the last team that started 5-0, which was in 2012, and they went on to lose several games in a row in conference after that. So, and they were ranked number 5 at one point that year. This is the first time they've been that high in the rankings. First time they've been that this deep into a season undefeated since then. So when you look at the remaining 7 games, Matt, all in conference, all in the Big 12, can you pick out one or maybe two that might be the biggest stumbling blocks or potential stumbling blocks for West Virginia?
Yeah, someone asked me this actually during the Texas Tech game. They were talking about how good West Virginia looked and if they could run the table. And I said, I'm not ready to say that just yet. And they were like, well, which games in the Big 12 scare you? I was like, well, you've got TCU, you've got Oklahoma, you've got Oklahoma State, you've got Baylor. I mean, all those teams can come in and have proven they can win against anyone on any given day. So outside of the Kansas and Iowa State game, any game on the schedule is still very losable, in my opinion. So, but this West Virginia team seems to have a good mind about itself. The thing with that team back in 2012, they were ranked 5th, like you said, went 5-0, go into Lubbock, and the wheels just fall off. I mean, a subpar Texas Tech team really kind of took them to the woodshed back then, and they lost 5 straight going after that. So they start 5-0, end up 5-5, and then go to a bowl game at the end of the year and end up losing that one too. So things just kind of fell apart for those guys. And the word around with the players who were there during that year talked a lot about how things just didn't seem right. They seemed too complacent. I mean, you had guys like Geno Smith, Tavon Austin, Stedman Bailey, who on the outside look like huge superstars, but then as soon as they leave, Holgorsen talks about how the leadership wasn't as good as people thought it was. So there's no Geno, there's no Tavon, there's no Stedman on this roster. There's multiple playmakers. There's all guys who are just looking to fill their role on offense, defense, and special teams. No one seems to be bigger than the team, and that you kind of got that feel from that 2012 team. I mean, obviously, going into that Lubbock game game in Lubbock, Geno was up for the Heisman, and then as Tyler Orlowski, the redshirt senior center who's still on this year's team, put it, that game kind of ended his run there. His campaign was over after that. So you don't have those outside influences on this year's team. They don't feel like they're respected at all, whereas that 2012 team probably felt they they had something special going on. They probably felt like they were finally getting the respect they earned. Even this team now, at ranked number 12, they feel like no one is respecting them. I guess the phrase they were throwing around on Tuesday was, these people didn't put us in the conversation to begin with. Why would we care what they think now? So that's the kind of the mantra they're carrying, and it seems to be paying off so far.
Matt Welch is my guest for this edition of Gajtka Game. And Matt, let's put the Mountaineers aside. We'll be following them, of course, as their season moves along. But I want to go inside the actor's studio, inside the reporter's studio, if you will, with you, and chat about your influences, how you got to where you are. And first of all, you're from West Virginia, so what has it been like to cover a team that you followed growing up? And, of course, for the Mountaineers, they're pretty much the only show in town, sports-wise. No offense to the West Virginia Black Bears, the Pirates affiliate in short season A-ball, but the Mountaineers are where it's at. So what's that scene like, and what's the media group like? How big is it that follows the team from game to game?
Yeah, I didn't actually get into WVU sports until about middle school. I had a good friend who's actually a reporter now, and he does a little bit of WVU coverage as well for the Dominion Post. So it's cool for both of us to be in that situation. But he actually took me to my first game back in 7th grade, and that's when I kind of fell in love with just the culture of WVU and how passionate the fans are. And things like that. And obviously I went to school there, didn't even study journalism. So, got kind of late in the game as far as, journalism goes, and the passion for that. But really it's just the fans, and just the atmosphere. I mean, there's no pro sports in West Virginia. There's a few minor league baseball teams, things like that, like you said. But, as far as sports goes, I mean, it's always been the Mountaineers. Even in the Eastern Panhandle, about 3 hours away from Morgantown, where I grew up, that's all they had to look forward to, whether it was on the TV, whether it was making the 3-hour drive to Morgantown, whatever it was. That's always what you look forward to. That and a few Friday night football games here and there. So just the passion of the fans really is what got me into it. And then as far as the media group, I mean, there's a handful of pretty dedicated guys on the beat, and it's always fun to watch them work. A lot of veterans who have been there a long time, and for me, being my first year, I kind of watch how they do things and see how they base their coverage a little bit, and kind of look at what kind of stories they're doing, and how they handle the beat, things like that. Especially coming from a high school background like I had for the past 3 years, working in newspapers, it's a lot different. So just trying to figure things out and get a good grip on everything. But it's definitely been fun so far.
And when you talk about the situation down there, being the biggest game in town and being the biggest entertainment entity in town, I'm sure information is kept under close watch. I know it's the case up here with the University of Pittsburgh, and they're in a market where they really have to reach out and try to get attention. In Morgantown, people are going to watch the Mountaineers no matter what. So how much of a challenge is that to get your own information, get stuff that other people don't have? How does that compare to other situations you've covered?
Yeah, for me, it's really been all about building relationships with everyone that you can. I learned that really early on working with high schools. It's all about taking an interest and not being fake about it, really being kind of dedicated to what you're doing, and letting people know that. Finding the story is really all about just having someone that can trust you with that kind of information. As far as how things are disseminated through sources and things like that for this beat, you see there was a lot of coaching changes this off season, and it kind of baffled me. As soon as I got on the beat, I had to go through and try to wrangle up 2 different big coaching changes for West Virginia on the football team, the football staff, and things like that. And as soon as you think you're on the right track, you look around and you figure out someone else has already got it. So it's definitely a fast-moving process. As soon as news comes out, I mean, it's not much longer before it's completely over with. So it's short-lived, but at the same time, in those few hours that it's out, it's big, and everyone's talking about it. So you just got to kind of keep your ear to the grindstone, build those relationships, and things will fall into place for you.
Last thing for you. You mentioned you didn't even study journalism in college. So how did you get into the business, or who or what pushed you into it?
Yeah, I actually studied creative writing in college. I was an English major, and I had in the English program at WVU, you have a lot of freedom to take other classes. There's a lot of open spots, things like that. So my advisor kind of told me to look for a minor or take a bunch of gym classes. So I looked into minors, and I found sports communication in the journalism department, and actually went the route of like sports marketing and sports management, things like that. And I looked for some internship somewhere, and I fell into one at Pittsburgh Sporting News with the good fellows over there that you know of.
Sure.
Michael Waterloo. Yeah, Michael Waterloo was actually the guy who really helped me a lot. I kind of just saw how dedicated he was to what he was doing, how much it meant to him, how to manage going with traveling and covering things, and still trying to maintain a home life and moving around, things like that. We were both kind of in some similar situations. So he was definitely a big mentor to me and helped me out a lot with things. But really, what stuck with me with sports journalism was just telling stories. As a creative writer, that's what I loved. I like finding new ways to tell stories that may have already been told before, or finding completely new stories that no one's ever heard of before and telling it in a way that it makes people remember who you are. Building that relationship, like I said, with readers is important. And that's something that I've tried to develop over my short time, and hopefully what comes out to be a long career. So just finding a story and telling it passionately is what really got me into that. I did a lot of features writing at Pittsburgh Sporting News, so that helped me out a lot. But all those guys over there were really helpful. Helped me into my first newspaper job, and then from there I just kind of took it and ran with it. And thankfully I'm where I'm at now, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
He's got the Mountaineers covered at dkpittsburghsports.com, and his name is Matt Welch. You can find him on Twitter one more time at Matt Welch, WELCH_PGH. Matt, thanks for your time, and we'll look for your coverage from this Saturday. Should be another big game down there in Morgantown.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
That's Matt. I'm Matt. I'll talk to you after this break, and we'll ban a cliche, as we always do here on the program.
Would you be interested in developing conscious choice? Would you be interested in creating reactions rather than waiting for one to come? Would you be interested in combining serendipity and synchronicity? Would you be interested in making 1 + 1 = 3? Would you be interested in finding out about full impact mindfulness? If so, I challenge you to join myself, Jim Ellermeyer, a cognitive behavioral health therapist, every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. on the River's Edge, where we will challenge you to allow us to help you help yourself to fully participate in your life. Let the adventure begin.
Third period time on Gajtka Sports Game. I'm your host, Matt Gajtka, and if I did a poor job of introducing myself, I am a reporter and analyst at dkpittsburghsports.com. I cover the Pirates primarily, but now in the baseball offseason, I'll be digging more into hockey and football, of course. And part of that includes some college sports as well. In fact, I want to say my first on-scene assignment since the end of the Pirates season will be at a place very familiar to me in Moon Township to cover the home opener for Robert Morris men's basketball. Andy Toole, one of the more highly regarded young coaches in America, will lead his Colonials against his old school Penn of the Ivy League, the Quakers, coming in. So that'll be a matchup that carries a little more interest than your typical one for Robert Morris, which plays in the NEC. Not a lot of schools in the area from the Northeast Conference, just St. Francis and PA, really that's within reasonable driving distance. So that Penn matchup seems like a pretty cool opportunity to get back out there and get back into it. Of course, everything is contingent on my wife's rapidly concluding pregnancy, which could end at any time. In fact, if you're watching this on Friday morning or listening to it on Friday morning, it may have already ended. We don't know. We were told to be ready at any point over the next week and a half, even though her due date is still a few days away. So that has added to the urgency of this October, even without Pirates baseball to concern myself with. Let's go to America's favorite recurring segment, Ban the Cliche. And I'm calling an audible on Ban the Cliche, in fact, because Matt Welch brought this up in our interview segment. Our expert witness, Matt Welch, talking West Virginia Mountaineers football just a moment ago. And he mentioned that the Mountaineers feel like that no one believes in them this year. And I was going to say that No Love Lost was my Ban the Cliche victim this week, but we'll put that one away. That one's even kind of lame. I don't hear it too much anymore anyway. It just got brought up on local talk radio this week, so that's what put it back in the front of my mind. However, No One Believes in Us has incredible staying power, and it seems like every team that wins a championship at some point says, well, no one believed we could do this. That is certainly not the case. There are, at least your fan base, I would imagine some people thought and believed you could do it. I hope that some people in your own clubhouse, locker room, believed you could do it. I would hope that maybe some random person out there who has no affiliation to your team believed you could do it. But the first time I remember really encountering this cliche, and typically I talk about sports media cliches, but this one is on the players and the teams themselves. So you are not going to be spared in this segment every week if you are listening out there. But the 2001-02 New England Patriots, the team that beat the Steelers in the AFC Championship game when Tom Brady took over for an injured Drew Bledsoe and led them to the championship. They beat the heavily favored Steelers in Pittsburgh, and then they took down the Rams in the New Orleans Superdome on an emotional night there. You might recall that U2 played the halftime show, and it was a 9/11 themed show. And, of course, with the Patriots in it, it just felt like it was meant to be with, of course, their team name and where they're from. But all that aside, their defeats of the Steelers and the Rams, yes, they were shocking. And that's when No One Believes in Us, I think, really grew some legs and moved on from there. And since then, you could probably find at least one instance on any championship team. Maybe not the 2009 Yankees. I'll put them out of that case because, well, they have unlimited resources, and when they won the championship, I think there were quite a few people who believed in them, and I think they had enough self-awareness in that clubhouse to realize that that was the case. But for the most part, I would say maybe 90 or 95% of professional and college champions over the last decade and a half since that fateful Patriots team have at some point mentioned something along the lines of no one believed this team could do it. And it's so predictable because there is adversity at some point for almost every team. No one runs through the season undefeated or unchallenged, and especially in the postseason, you're playing tough competition. It's not going to be easy, but I think some teams let that influence their thinking into believing that there is no one out there who thinks they can get it done in the end, when in fact it's just more of a level playing field when you get closer and closer to the championship. And yes, there are upsets that happen and things like that occur, but the no one believes in us trope is very tiresome these days. And you've heard it from the Indians just this week, and we'll talk about them in the final segment today. But Cleveland saying that no one believed in them, and hey, I didn't believe in them. I'll give them that much. They lost two of their top three starting pitchers before the end of the regular season, and essentially won it on the strength of their bullpen. Andrew Miller being deployed judiciously by Terry Francona. I talked about that last week in the opening segment of the show. And again, I applaud you, Terry, for your creative and in some ways retro usage of your relief ace. But it's been Andrew Miller, some duct tape, some random home runs from guys who had been cold previously. Heck, Coco Crisp, who I thought was out of the league a couple of years ago, had some big hits for the Indians. So they might be closer to the no one believes in us reality than most teams, but at some point this has to be beaten into the ground and taken out of our collective sports lexicon. Not just because it's not true, which in almost all cases it isn't true that no one believed in the team that went on to have success, but also because it's old and tired, and it's time for it to go away. And so Ban the Cliche focuses in on No One Believes in Us this week. We're going to put that one to bed, and it will never be spoken again on Gajtka Game. And I hope if you're out there talking about sports at any point, you realize the error of your ways before you open your mouth to say that fun little phrase. We'll take our final break on Gajtka Game and bring it back for the conclusion, a word on the NFL, and another, not just public relations disaster for the league, but a human relations disaster, if you will. And I'll elaborate more and also give you your final number for the week before we close out this program. I'm Matt Gajtka, and this is Gajtka Game.
Stay clear of the streets, for God's sake! The timid and the fearful drivers are every bit as bad as the aggressive drivers. Nobody in Pittsburgh knows what a right-of-way is. I go down the road and I just sing this song, the gas is on the right, the gas is on the right, hi-ho the highway, yo! The gas is on the right.
Get educated with Brian Crawford, live Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 10 a.m. here on the River's Edge.
We have reached overtime on Gajtka Game. Before I get my mouth rolling again, a special thank you to all the folks who make these shows possible. Brian Crawford, who has been my producer and my board operator on many an occasion, usually when I'm recording the show live in the morning. You can catch him on River Talk, by the way, multiple times a week right here on this very station. So thanks to Brian, thanks to Tom Benoit, who's running the board tonight. And thanks to his fiancée, Sarah Kramer, who, speaking of the Indians, American League champions, pennant winners, she's an Indians fan, so I guess I'll maybe pull for the Indians in the World Series. We'll see what happens. It's tough to root for Cleveland when you're from Pittsburgh, man. It really is, says Tom on the other side of the board. But Sarah does quite a bit of our business endeavor, or she handles quite a bit of our business endeavors, in addition to some other logistical things. So I never shout her out, and especially with Cleveland in the World Series for the first time since '97, it all lines up to give her just due. And a little bit more on baseball in just a minute, but you'll notice we didn't talk NFL very much, in fact at all, I don't think, besides my reference to the Patriots in our previous segment and Ban the Cliche. And that's for a reason, because, again, the NFL has had another domestic violence screw-up, I'll put it that way. Giants kicker Josh Brown has been suspended by the team due to one domestic violence incident in particular against his wife, and evidently word is coming out from reports in New York that the Giants knew about a previous situation at the Brown household dating back to the Pro Bowl earlier this year, so several months ago, and they kept him on the team and tried to keep it quiet. So this harkens right back to the whole Ray Rice situation in 2014, and at that time we thought the NFL had learned its lesson and had figured out a way to punish these perpetrators of domestic violence. And not to put it in a special category, but for many of us who have been touched by it in our personal lives, and my wife and her family is included in that, it's a difficult thing, and it has been an epidemic, no doubt, not just in professional sports in general, but I would say particularly in football. There have been situation after situation in which, previous to the Ray Rice incident, that it wasn't handled properly, it wasn't handled judiciously enough, and we have another. Again, I call it a screw-up, and that, I think, is the most apt word or phrase I can use to describe what just happened here. But Josh Brown, I believe I saw, will not be taking the trip to London for the Giants game this weekend out there as part of the NFL's International Series. So at least there's that, but I have a feeling that it's just because it got out in the public and not because the Giants all of a sudden felt like it was time to take action. So back in 2014, when the Ray Rice video was released in particular that showed him dragging his unconscious fiancée out of the elevator in an Atlantic City casino, I didn't watch the NFL from the midway point of the season onward. I just put it out of my mind, and I was convinced to go back because I felt that they had addressed certain things and certain problems in their ability to deal with these types of cases moving into the future. But I have to admit, I'm not exactly looking forward to another weekend of NFL football. Steelers and Patriots in a massive game for both sides this weekend at Heinz Field, but it feels like a waste of time, and it feels very irrelevant and small considering another screw-up by the NFL related to domestic violence, and in particular, violence against an NFL player's significant other. So, I couldn't cast more of a disappointing light on this whole conundrum here, this problem that the NFL continues to, in a lot of ways, inflict upon itself because it's not as proactive as it needs to be. And if the Giants knew in the at the Pro Bowl, which occurs in late January, then I guarantee someone in the NFL office knew, and they decided to keep it under the carpet, try to shove it along, get him treatment, and hope he didn't mess up again. But Josh Brown did indeed mess up again, and in a big way. So I don't feel so bad about ignoring the NFL for the most part this week, despite being in the middle of the season. So on to more positive things, and one of the more positive moments of every Gajtka Sport game for me is the final number, and my final number this week is 2, as in the number of Cubs wins away as of Thursday night. We are from a Cleveland-Chicago World Series, and I'm sure you know by now, if you're any kind of casual baseball fan, that the Chicago Cubs have not won a World Series since 1908. To put it in perspective, the following year, the Pirates won the World Series with Honus Wagner leading the squad. So, Honus, one of the greatest players in baseball history, you could argue the greatest shortstop in baseball history. But he's the guy, of course, whose baseball card is sold for millions of dollars because there's basically only a couple of them left on planet Earth. The Cubs, the last time they won the World Series, it was before World War I. So I'm not sure I have to say any more than that. But beyond that, I think the other drought that doesn't get much attention or as much attention with Chicago is they haven't even been to the World Series since I want to say 1947. I have to look this one up, but it's been their lack of a pennant has been longer than anyone else's championship drought. And if they can just get 2 more wins, and again, recording this on a Thursday night, so if they do beat the Dodgers this evening, then they'll be 1 away and they can clinch it at home at Wrigley Field. But 1945, okay, I'm corrected here. Thank you, Wikipedia, for bailing me out. I thought it was 47. It's 45. The last time the Cubs have even been in the World Series. The last time they've even represented the National League. And I won't be surprised at all to see the Cubs move on. In fact, I declared last week on Twitter, sticking my neck out a little bit, that I thought the Cubs won the World Series when they eliminated the Giants in the first round because as the best team in baseball, which I believe the Cubs are, and I don't think there's any kind of real argument about it this year, the biggest hazard is the shorter sample, the shorter series, and the best of 5 NLDS against the Giants, in which the Giants almost forced a Game 5 before the Cubs came back late. That was the biggest danger point for Chicago because the longer the series is, the more likely the better team wins. And the Cubs, indeed, are the better team. But the team that will be awaiting them is nearly just as tortured. The Cleveland Indians. And I mentioned earlier their first World Series since '97 when they lost a complete heartbreaker in 7 games to the Florida Marlins, who were just 4 years into their lifetime, into their existence as a Major League franchise. But the last time the Indians won the World Series was '48, so we're going back to World War II days, basically, and the presidencies of Truman and later Eisenhower. It has been a long time for both of these teams, and it would be terrific, I think, to see both of them battle it out to see who gets to finally pop the champagne at the end of the season. And in a way, it would make up for one of my biggest disappointments as a sports fan, which was the 2003 World Series. It ended up being Marlins-Yankees, you may recall. And it was a big letdown for me. 18-year-old Matt Gajtka was looking forward to the Cubs advancing past the Marlins in the NLCS. And on the other side, the Red Sox beating the Yankees, but both the Sox and the Cubs lost in dramatic fashion in the championship series, and that is the only World Series to date that I have completely boycotted. I didn't watch a single inning of that. I was so disappointed that we were so close to Boston, Chicago, and at that time Boston hadn't won a World Series since 1918. Now they've won 3 in the past decade plus, so good for them. They're definitely out of that category, but Cleveland, Chicago was about as close as we could get to what would have been in 2003, so I'm pulling hard for it. Go Cubs, go, and, well, I already said what I feel about rooting for Cleveland. It's a little awkward, but it will be fun again, even after the Cavaliers won the NBA championship earlier this year. There are Indians fans who don't root for the Cavs, so I will feel good for them to see their team on the biggest stage of the sport once again. Thanks for watching Gajtka Sports Game, and again, I appreciate your listenership and viewership each and every week on the River's Edge, found at riversedgepgh.com. Thanks to Matt Welch and again Tom Benoit for running the board. This is Matt Gajtka reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. Next time I talk to you, I could be a father. I'll keep you updated, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great weekend.